Thank you. Since 2002, the American Research Center in Egypt has been involved in a major conservation project at a site known as the Red Monastery. The project has been funded by the United States Agency for International Development, administered by ARCI, and directed by Professor Elizabeth Bowman in collaboration with the Egyptian Ministry of State for Antiquities and the Coptic Orthodox Church. Last year, an RC fellowship gave me a superb opportunity to conduct research for my PhD dissertation at the Red Monastery, where I was graciously hosted by Father Antonius. For their invaluable support, I am extremely grateful to the entire RC staff, particularly Jody Deutsch, Michael Jones, and the director Gary Scott. I also wish to express my profound gratitude to my academic advisor, Professor Bowman, for her Herculean work on the project and for involving me in it. The book publication of the multidisciplinary endeavors at the Red Monastery will become available in 2016. My PhD dissertation in progress, on which this paper draws, is building on the findings of the numerous team members and book contributors who dedicated vast amounts of time and energy to the project. The Red Monastery, situated near the ancient city of Panopolis, was founded sometime in the 4th century by the hermit Peshoy. It joined a monastic federation under the leadership of the nearby White Monastery. The federation's prolific abbot Shenute wrote copiously and commissioned a monumental church that still stands among the archaeological remains at the White Monastery. The smaller and somewhat later Red Monastery Church was built in circa 475. Both churches are triconch basilicas, called such for the presence of 3 apses, or conches, at the east end of the rectangular nave. The current appearance of the Red Monastery Church is a product of several construction and restoration campaigns. The now roofless nave and the adjoining tower post-date the early Byzantine sanctuary. The wall that encloses the basilica's east end was erected in the early 20th century. Behind it is the early Byzantine facade that originally separated the sanctuary from the nave. The interior of the triconch dazzles the visitor with an explosion of polychromy. What we see today is a palimpsest of 3 main phases of painting that span a century or more, from circa 475 to circa 600. The other early Byzantine monastic sites in Egypt noteworthy for their painted decoration include Kelia, Bawit, and Saqqara. Unlike the wall paintings from those places, however, which have been either destroyed or removed to museums, the painted program of the Red Monastery Church can be analyzed in its primary context of architecture and architectural sculpture. This visual environment offers an elaborate example of the purposefully designed settings in which ascetics practiced their carefully shaped lifestyle. Today, I would like us to view the triconch through the lens of visuality that is concerned with the relation between seeing, knowing, and visual representation. Visuality refers to vision as a social construction and also approaches the social world as a visual construction. The viewer's identities and beliefs about vision inform their expectations as to what the sense of sight would be able to detect or conjure up under the given circumstances. The principal intended viewer of the triconch sanctuary's interior was the male monastic. Central to my discussion of visuality in early Byzantine ascetic contexts is the Greek term theoria. Its literal meaning is seeing, but in early Christian literature it refers to spiritual beholding and divine contemplation. In this paper, I propose that the concept of theoria as a mode of spiritual seeing in early Byzantine asceticism can enhance our interpretation of the Red Monastery Sanctuary's ensemble of architecture, architectural sculpture, and painting. The textual sources relevant to the ascetic life in Byzantine Egypt explain that the pinnacle of Theoria is the ability to see God. For example, "You shall be a wise man in your cell, building up your soul as you sit in your cell, while glory is with you, while humility is with you, while the fear of God surrounds you day and night, while your cares are thrown down, while your soul and your thoughts watch God in astonishment, gazing at him all the days of your life." In brief then, the ideal monk prayed ceaselessly in his cell in order to see the invisible God. The visual evidence suggests the same. Several prayer niches at Bawit and Saqqara depict the vision of Christ as God at the end of time. This image is typically called Christ in Majesty. Its iconography draws on the books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Revelation. More importantly, for the purposes of this paper, Christ in Majesty represents the vision of Christ as God that was the objective of Theoria. Christ in Majesty was depicted 3 different times in the east semidome of the Red Monastery triconch. Most of the plaster supporting the image of Christ in Majesty fell off already in the early Byzantine period. In its original state, it would have looked something like this. This gives us a rare opportunity to examine Christ in Majesty in its intended physical setting. The elevation of each apse can be divided into 5 main registers. Level 1 contains niches, doorways, and columns supporting the lower entablature. Level 2 features a series of niches punctuated by freestanding limestone columns. 3 semidomes rest atop the upper entablature. The early Byzantine surface stretches above in the spandrels and the clerestory. Only the dome is entirely modern. With the exception of the spandrels and the clerestory, it is virtually impossible to find a large area of flat wall. The overall design juxtaposes deeply recessed niches with a freestanding colonnade. Dale Kinney has observed that the interior of the triconch quotes the formal vocabulary of what architectural historians refer to as Roman edicular facades. The adjective edicular derives from the noun edicule, an architectural frame around a niche consisting of 2 columns or pilasters with a pediment above. An edicular facade, then, is a multi-story elevation of a building that features such architectural frames around niches. In addition to the Red Monastery triconch, only one other multi-story edicular facade survives in Egypt at the nearby White Monastery. Its original visual impact has been reduced due to the loss of color, amongst other things. Another close comparandum to the edicular facade of the Red Monastery triconch is further afield, in Jordan. In fact, there is more resemblance between the triconch and the Nymphaeon than between the triconch and the church of Al-Adria der al-Suryan, which is geographically, chronologically, and contextually closer to the Red Monastery church than the 2nd century Nymphaeon in Jordan. The design of Roman edicular facades is related to the scaenae frons. In Roman theaters, the scaenae frons was the decorated architectural facade of the scaena, which served as the background to the playing area. In the Hellenistic and Roman imperial periods, theaters were used for festivals that consisted of various forms of entertainment, including musical performances and athletic competitions. Their participants formed associations like the Guild of the Artists of Dionysus, mentioned in a 2nd century inscription that was discovered in the South Theater at Gerasa, or modern Jerash. The last line of the text states that both contestants in the games and persons who perform in the theater on other occasions must bring in wreaths for the statue of the emperor. Whoever fails to do so shall pay as penalty at the time of the festival, Theoria, 25 denarii to the guild, and at other times the same amount to the city. So note again that the Greek word for festival in this inscription is Theoria. As already mentioned, the basic meaning of this word is seeing. In Greek culture, Theoria referred to a religious delegation sent by a Greek city to consult an oracle or take part in a festival at a sanctuary outside its territory. Delegates, called Theori, who visited shrines, witnessed sacred spectacles in a space that provided the context for a sacralized mode of viewing and apprehension. At Delphi, for example, they interacted with Apollo, the god who presided over that shrine and festivals that took place there. This model of traditional theoria served as a foundation for Plato's definition of philosophy as a quest for divinely inspired wisdom residing in the metaphysical realm of the forms. As Andrea Wilson Nightingale aptly explained, quote, "The philosophers favored this paradigm for several reasons. First, they sought to conceptualize a mode of apprehension that took the form of seeing divine essences or truths. Theoria at religious festivals, in which the pilgrim viewed icons, sacred images, and ritualized spectacles, offered a good model for this conception of philosophical vision. The Christian authors valued the concept of theoria for reasons similar to those put forth by Plato. John Cassian, who lived among the desert ascetics in Egypt for about a decade in the late 4th century, appropriated this term to define the monk's goal. Just like Plato cast the philosopher as a new theoros, I think that Cassian intended to present the monk as a new philosopher engaged in theoria, that is, spiritual beholding and divine contemplation. In this model, the monk's virtuous state enabled him to attain supreme knowledge and to see God. Cassian's language abounds in phrases such as "before our eyes" that highlight the importance of vision for divine contemplation. A closer look at theori, that is, those who participated in or were associated with various expressions of theoria, can further elucidate its function in late antiquity. Ian Rutherford noted that in the context of festivals with athletic competitions, athletes probably accompanied the official theoria from their city. The winning artists and athletes of a festival theoria were honored with the title Ironike Stephanite, that is, crowned victors. The already quoted inscription from the South Theater at Gerasa mentions wreaths for the emperor's statue. Although the text does not specify the statue's location, we know that one of the purposes of edicular facades, including the scenarum frontes of theater buildings, was to house statues inside the niches. To the extent that they can be reconstructed, the sculptural programs of edicular facades featured deities, famous citizens, and personifications. The facade of the library of Chalcis in Ephesus, for example, showcased multiple statues of the patron himself, as well as of his personified virtues, excuse me, among them wisdom. An inscription states that the likenesses of Chalcis were to be hung with wreaths 3 times a year, and the remaining statues were also decorated every year on the birthday feast of Chalcis. Instead of 3-dimensional sculptures, painted likenesses of saints inhabit the edicular niches of the Red Monastery triconch. They date to the 6th century and depict local monastic saints, bishops of Alexandria, Basil of Caesarea, and the protomartyr Stephen. The figures in the round niches received 2 circlets. The statues of Chalcis and his virtues on the facade of the Ephesian library were to be wreathed a few times a year, but in the Red Monastery triconch, the act of crowning the saints is taking place perpetually. In the Red Monastery images, the circlets refer to the crown of martyrdom. The biblical underpinning for the association between crown and martyrdom is 2 Timothy 4:7-8. I have fought a good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. The literary sources framed the ascetic movement as a form of martyrdom, and the painted program of the Red Monastery visualizes this relationship as well. Stephen, the first martyr, and Peshoy, the founder of the Red Monastery, flanked the East Alps. Because martyrdom and monasticism were compared to an agonistic contest, martyrs and ascetics were frequently called the athletes of piety. The ascetic contest's first prize was the vision of God, depicted in the East Semidome. To win that prize, monks are said to have exercised vigils, prayers, the frequent reading of and constant meditation on scripture, the chanting of the psalms, manual labors, and bodily deprivations such as fasts. Basil of Caesarea discussed fasting in particular as an athletic contest whose ultimate reward was the vision of God. In his words, before the games in the stadiums, the athletes are brought forward and they are given speeches that are full of how they have to exert themselves so they can win the crown. So by persuasion, many can be joined together in ambition for victory, even to the disregard of their own bodies. Basil also mentioned specific biblical exemplars who perfected fasting so well that they were able to see God. Moses, through long perseverance in fasting and prayer, received the law and heard the words of God. Elijah was deemed worthy of the vision of God when he also had practiced abstinence in like degree. And what of Daniel? How did he attain to the contemplation of marvels? Was it not after a 20-day fast? Basil is depicted in the South Lobe, and all three figures mentioned by him in the just quoted passage are represented across the space in the North Semidome. The deep curvature of the Semidome allows Elijah to gaze at the vision of God in the East Semidome, towards which Daniel points his fingers, with Moses standing next to him. It is not easy to demonstrate these sightlines with photographs precisely because they were meant to be experienced by the monk inside the triconch. The monks who had unrestricted access to the physical space of the triconch would have been able to engage fully in their role as Christian theori, embarking on the contemplative quest to absorb the vision of God. The triconch, with its architectural vocabulary evoking the tradition of festival theoria and agonistic contests, would have provided a fitting setting for this theoric journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very stimulating.